great, yeah.
Yeah.
Whatever you think is appropriate, just let me know.
It's just you, so I'm fairly sure that should be fine. Yeah. Oh. All right. Hey everybody. We're ready to start. Comrades. Hello. Hi everybody. My name's Arlo. I've come down to this conference from Gadigal land, and I'll be chairing this panel for you today. Ring. I would like to begin by acknowledging that we're meeting on stolen land, the land of the Kulin Nation, an alliance of 5 Aboriginal nations. They are the rightful, sovereign owners of this land on which we live, work and organise. Sovereignty was never ceded, not here or anywhere across this continent. We pay our respects to elders past, present and emerging. As socialists, we pledge to fight against all manifestations of colonisation, including, but certainly not limited to, the children being removed from their parents and communities, incarceration and deaths in custody faced by our First Nations brothers and sisters, the poverty gap and the high unemployment rates affecting their communities. This always was, always will be, Aboriginal land. Before we start, actually, you probably know where the toilets are by now. If you're just rocking up for this last session of the conference, then they're on this level in the ground floor. Green Left and Socialist Alliance are the hosts of this conference, and we would like to get you involved with socialist politics. If you would like to get involved with socialist politics, we will be handing around a sheet which will keep you in touch with Green Left activist calendar, which will let you know what's going on in your area. After the speakers are finished, we'll pass that around. We also have an information stall right outside, and we encourage you to go there if you have any questions for our members. Before we start, I would just like to say something quickly. Where my notes are. Before I introduce Cyn, I just want to say that I know that this panel is called Pushing Back Against Trump and the far-right billionaire class, but I just want to highlight something that we all know here as socialists. The atrocities that the United States thrusts upon the world and the work that our own government does at its behest to the detriment of our most vulnerable communities did not start with Donald Trump, and our work does not end when his faux God-king-like rule comes to an end. We lightheartedly put our US comrades on the spot, and they take it in good nature. But I'm so glad to have Cyn and our other US comrade here today. It's comforting knowing that in the seat of empire, in the face of decades of attrition in the masses, there have been and there are people on the ground fighting the good fight, and that their numbers are growing. If they can do what they do and keep showing up in the face of deportations, hostile city takeovers, and whatever else is thrown at vulnerable communities, seemingly at the whims of the egomaniacal Donald Trump and his cabinet of horrors, we can keep showing up too. And we should keep showing up too for ourselves, and as we've heard from this weekend, our brothers and sisters across the Asia-Pacific. In a few seconds, you'll be introduced by Cyn Huang. He is a student and labour activist based in Berkeley, California. He served as the co-chair of the Young Democratic Socialists of America and as head steward in the United Auto Workers Local 2865. He's a member of Bread and Roses, a Marxist democratic socialist tendency in the DSA, with members in various labour unions and campuses across the country, and 3 city councillors. After Cyn's spoken, I'll take a list of those of you who would like to contribute in groups of 3. So please indicate to me by raising your hand. Each contribution should be no longer than 3 minutes, and I will inform those contributors when those 3 minutes are up. This session will be live streamed, so please be aware if you are actually, is this session live streamed? Yes, there we go. If you are asking a question or making a point for discussion, that it will be filmed and eventually go up public on YouTube. Cyn Huang, everybody.
Thanks so much. Hi, comrades. Hope you guys had a good lunch. During the opening panel Q&A the other night, you guys grilled me with some good questions, so hopefully lunch has placated you. You throw me some freebies this time. Yeah, I'm just kidding. I relish the tough questions. It's a good chance to clarify what we ought to be doing, and that's why we're here. But first, I just want to begin by saying that it's been an honor to be here with you all. Typically, when the US and Australia meet, they meet as AUKUS, so it's nice to have a meeting convened by solidarity for a change. And I want to thank Socialist Alliance and Green Left for the invitation. It's been a really, really impressive conference this far. I'm sure, all of us have attended well-organized conferences before, but what makes this one stand out in my experience is the depth and breadth of its internationalism. I think it shows up in a lot of different ways, in people's familiarity with a lot of different political situations. It shows up in our curiosity about each other's experiences. I think the diversity of all the panels, there's a huge range of topics, as well as comrades from around the world contributing either in person or over Zoom. And this is a very special and precious opportunity, especially for me, coming from the US. The US left is very young. The current iteration of it really only got started 10 years ago. That means we have a long, long ways to go in terms of rebuilding our understanding, our connections, and solidarity with working class people and socialists all over the world. And as I was telling some Socialist Alliance comrades, you guys are often our foothold into world politics. Green Left and Links are some of the few places where you can actually go to get coverage of Indonesia, Bangladesh, South Korea in English, or international socialist debates about ecology, which the U.S. unfortunately is a little woefully behind on. So thank you and congratulations on building a tool that's not just helpful for the construction of Socialist Alliance, but the left internationally. Today, I'll be talking about a theme that most of the international left probably knows a lot about, has a lot of opinions on, and that is Donald Trump's second administration and the resistance that has been developing to it. It's a really complex topic given the size of the U.S., given that the U.S.'s imperial influence knows no boundaries, and the fact that this is an administration whose ambitions are nothing smaller than reorganizing the world to suit the needs of American capital. So there are too many variables, too many fronts to keep track of. So what I'll try to do is to systematize things, is to talk through three different themes. One would be the international situation, the context behind the return of Trump and the imperial presidency. The second thing I'll try to do is characterize Trump's regime and give a summary of the main developments since his return to the Oval Office. And third, I'll try to talk through the state of the resistance, how it's been developing, the victories we've had, and also the challenges ahead. So, to begin by contextualizing the return of Trump, it's clear that this conference has a shared diagnosis of the conditions that have led to the rise of the far right around the world. It's a combination of the deep, multifaceted crisis we're living through, plus the fact that established parties have no way of getting us out of this mess. In fact, taking turns at administering neoliberalism and the weakness of any left-wing alternative is the exact recipe for growing the far right. Trump's election in 2016 and also his re-election, which came off the backs of disappointing Obama and Biden administrations, are no exception to this trend, but Trump is not just any far-right figure. He, along with the genocide he's helping commit in Gaza, is the most rotten expression of the far right. Trump is not simply extending the worst aspects of neoliberalism, those being, tax cuts for the rich, deregulation, attacks on working people, and social movements, clawing, what remains, the tiny remains that exist of the welfare state. He's not simply doing these things to a greater degree. He's pushing a neo-fascist policy aiming at reorganizing the global economy, geopolitical alliances, and civilization as we know it. In the words of Sam Altman, the CEO of OpenAI, who you guys might have seen just a few days ago with other tech CEOs at a White House dinner, in his words, capitalism is in such crisis that we need to overhaul the social contract. So in order to understand the brutality of Trump 2.0 compared to 1.0, or why it feels like we're entering in an unprecedented, catastrophic, potentially terminating phase in human history, we have to understand the U.S.'s position in the world, and particularly the decline of U.S. hegemony against the rise of countries like China as a global superpower. To breeze through a familiar story, the U.S., emerged from World War II as, the undisputed global hegemon, really off the backs of its war economy. Of course, there was a competition with the Soviet Union, but economically, there was no match there, only military and political exchange. In the post-war period, the U.S. constructed a international rules-based order, so-called, a system of international law, multinational institutions like the IMF, the World Bank, the World Trade Organization, and other structures meant to secure U.S. economic and geopolitical interest under the guise of liberalism and human rights. This rules-based order has faced serious threats. In the 70s, we faced a recession characterized by stagflation, high inflation and unemployment caused by, oil shocks, the debt accumulated from the Vietnam War, the collapse of the Bretton Woods system. And then we had another major crisis ushered in by the burst of the U.S. housing bubble in 2007-8. This last crisis, which, has financial, social, political, and economic aspects that are all deeply enmeshed, is still unresolved. Since the 2000s, the U.S., to speak of the economic components of it, the U.S. has been in a long-term state of little to no growth, significant unemployment, low interest rates used to stimulate the economy that does not have enough demand for it. Growth in the U.S. yearly has been about 2%, 1% for Europe, 0.5% for Japan. Meanwhile, China's output is increasing by 5 to 10% a year. So there's been nothing like the rise of China in the past 25 years, except for the rise of the U.S. itself at the end of the 19th century. China, in the meantime, has become the workshop of the world. When the U.S. globalized its economy in the early 90s, we searched the world for cheap, unregulated labor, exporting much of our production to China. The strategic gamble was that we thought we could incorporate China into the U.S.-dominated world order. But now we're in the ironic position of depending on the Chinese Communist Party for everything from phones, plastics, furniture, to military supplies. China now is the major trading partner for over 120 countries, including Australia and many other countries in this region. Through the Belt and Road Initiative, BRI, China is organizing a new economic zone, trying to bring Asia, Africa, Europe, increasingly under its domination. And this year, China announced its Made in China 2025 initiative, which lays out China's plan to be the leader in EV, lithium battery, solar, high-tech industries, and not just a leader, but independent of the U.S. So this is a very alarming situation for the U.S. ruling class, which has never faced an adversary like China before. To an extent, presidents before Trump have tried to address the issue in a piecemeal sort of way. Obama tried first through several policies, most notably his pivot to Asia, which shifted the U.S.'s foreign policy focus from the Middle East, Iraq and Afghanistan, to the East by setting up relationships with Asian countries to counter China's growing influence. For example, the Trans-Pacific Partnership that brought together 12 Pacific Rim countries. Obama also vamped up oil production in the U.S. to bring us back to the position of being the world's top producer of oil. And despite calling for a world free of nuclear weapons, Obama pledged to spend over $1 trillion over the next 30 years to modernize U.S. weapons. Then came Joe Biden with a Trump presidency in between. Obama's successor. He also pushed industrial policy to counter China, offering attractive subsidies to industries like EV, solar panels, semiconductors, and putting sanctions on semiconductor exports to China to hold back Chinese development of AI and other high tech. These policies, though, have not been enough to stem China's growing influence, and other developments such as Russia's invasion of Ukraine, as well as the pandemic, have exposed the U.S. ruling class's decline in power and high degree of dependence on China, its biggest rival. So this is the context in which U.S. capitalism has elevated a figure like Trump to power. Trump is erratic. He is narcissistic and unreliable for sure, but it's also true that his attempts to restore U.S. power economically, politically, militarily in the world far surpass attempts made by other servants of U.S. capital. So if the U.S. is no longer guaranteed to win under a system of free trade and an integrated world market, then the system has to go. And no one can accuse Trump of not making an emphatic attempt to change the system. This, I want to argue, is the main backdrop to Trump 2.0. That is the U.S.'s declining power in the world, or obviously it's still the global hegemon, but relative decline in power, as well as the growing threat of competitors like China and Russia. The goal of reasserting U.S. power over the world, I believe, is the overarching, though not the only factor that explains the orientation of his administration. And in order to assert U.S. dominance over the world, Trump is primarily betting on bringing industry and manufacturing back to the U.S. and to make it more profitable to produce in the U.S. than anywhere else in the world. And to accomplish that, he's using the power of the American state in a way that we haven't really seen since perhaps FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt. He's using this power to jettison, our international rules-based order and to change our regime domestically from a bourgeois democratic one to an authoritarian one, and aiding this process all around the world too when it suits his needs. How successful Trump's proposals will be is another question. American corporations have had no state discipline over them for decades, and to make greater profits, we've shifted production to China, Vietnam, India, and other places where labor is cheaper. And despite all the tools that he has been using, Trump, giving subsidies, tax breaks, there's a lot of contingencies that he can't entirely plan for, signaling a weaker phase in U.S. imperialism. He doesn't know who his successor will be, if they're going to continue his policies, provide the stability that capitalists need to have to invest in the U.S. He can't plan for every countermove by China and Russia and the unintended consequences of his, strong art and tactics that are encouraging, countries dominated by U.S. imperialism to look to other places to be dependent on. But to survey, his agenda together, from Trump's general commitment to make America great again, flows a wide range of policies. Trump is, for example, constructing a police state so he can quell dissent and intimidate people against fighting back against his agenda. What this looks like is, very recently, federalizing the D.C. police, citing emergency powers to stick the Marines and the National Guard on American citizens. He gave the pretense of only doing this to protect federal property. We know that it's been used to do evictions against, houseless people, to aid in deportations. His big, beautiful bill included an unprecedented military budget of $1.01 trillion, funds that will be used for racist policing, for deportations, splitting families apart, and detaining protesters. On that line, a huge goal of his is breaking the backbone of social movements. He's done this through surveillance and policing, deporting activists, applying pressure on universities to discipline students who speak up for Palestine. Over the past couple of months, he's rescinded collective bargaining rights from hundreds of thousands of federal employees, which connects to the other plank of his platform, taking down public services and deregulating the economy beyond recognition to help billionaires gain profit. What that looks like is lifting all restrictions on oil and gas production to provide cheaper energy. Just forget about every environmental protection you've been talking about. It looks like firing huge swaths of the federal workforce from pretty much every single agency you can think of. This is a move that does a lot of things. It legitimizes the withdrawal of the state and providing for people's basic needs. It paves the way for privatization and for the growth of very individualistic, hyper-competitive ideologies that say you have to fight each other to make it through life. He's destroying the federal workforce, too, is also a great way to make sure that the limited protections that do exist under our legal framework don't get enforced. And here, Trump's big, beautiful bill comes up again and again. Within it, there's a provision called the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act that Trump actually passed in 2017. The bill renews it, which means huge kickbacks to large corporations. There's billions of dollars cut from U.S. international aid programs, which of course come with a million different strings attached, but were used to reduce disease, famine, provide disaster relief. It's important to say that one of the main hurdles in passing the big, beautiful bill was the projection that it would add around $3.5 trillion to the U.S.'s debt. So, of course, one tool to address that debt is to promise astronomical cuts to health, education, and social assistance. So under the big, beautiful bill, we'll see Medicaid coverage decrease. Accessing it is increasingly onerous. An estimated 8 million beneficiaries are going to get excluded from the program, which currently serves 70 million Americans, approximately like 20% of the population. Another major plank of his is state intervention into the economy. That doesn't just mean privatization, helping with privatization and deregulation and putting money in the pockets of billionaires. It also means giving the state more ability to dictate companies' policies. And so I think this week or last week, what we saw is the government take a 10% stake in Intel, which is a huge multinational tech company. And this is what we would expect during serious imperial wars. What you see is the state getting more and more control over the economy, by the military and the state. And although the situation with Intel and NVIDIA is emergent, it's not clear how it's going to unfold. This is a move that socialists must oppose. More power for Trump and the state to dictate what these CEOs are going to do. There's so many other things. Trump is attacking free speech and putting a microphone to the far right in the battle of ideas. This policy also is a multi-pronged approach. He's using anti-Semitism in our universities as a pretext to extort U.S. universities. So they're like $100 million deals he's trying to secure against schools like Harvard, very high-profile Ivy League ones. He just got hundreds of million dollars from Columbia in New York City. He's not just getting money from them, he's trying to put them under his ideological supervision. He's sacking labor statisticians who reveal that unemployment is suffering under him. He's restricting independent media from going to his press conferences, as well as in Gaza, where journalists, just like everyone else, are being bombed, starved, and shot. People have probably heard about the book bans that first got a foothold in the southern states of our country, and he has people like Jeff Bezos that he can whisper in their ear, and during the election campaign, what did we see the Washington Post do? By the way, Jeff Bezos just bought the Washington Post. The Washington Post, for the first time ever, did not endorse the Democratic candidate. Related to this policy of attacking free speech is undermining scientific progress. Trump has cut billions of dollars worth of grants that are needed for life-saving medical research, other socially necessary studies. He's installing uncritical yes men into key scientific posts. So, right now we have RFK Jr. as the Secretary of Health and Human Services. He's drumming up an age-old narrative about vaccines being connected to autism and drumming up these lies. He's also supporting, sham scientists who deny the urgency of the climate crisis and will clear a path for extractive industries to continue drilling, cutting down forests, polluting, attacking indigenous people. If we look beyond the domestic situation, we see Trump helping Israel carry out its final solution. The genocide has, it become even unpalatable for some parts of capital around the world. We see states like the UK and France gesture at, acknowledging Palestinian statehood, although we know that there's no real depth to their commitment. But, even though some aspects of the genocide are unpalatable, on the other hand, the U.S. has gained so much from it. Why would we criticize Israel, the guarantor of U.S. interests in the Middle East, our henchman, when Israel now is enjoying the strongest position it has ever had in the region, though, of course, things there are very unstable and always will be unstable so long as we have a state founded upon apartheid, ethnic cleansing, and the systematic dehumanization of another people. So this is a huge aspect of the world situation that he's contributed to. But the other main tool has been Trump's tariffs war. Trump's tariffs are intended to protect American production by keeping out foreign competition, allowing domestic companies to increase prices and profits. Trump's tariffs, of one sort or another, have been threatened or enacted since his first week in office. Recently, the war entered a new phase, with Trump securing plenty of deals against so-called allies and foes alike. In terms of allies, there are steeper levies on Japan, South Korea, and the European Union. They've been imposed with like 15% tariffs, with priority assigned to American auto and tech. But as for foes alike, too, Trump has taken on BRICS head-on recently. He imposed a 50% tariff on Brazil. And what's interesting is that Trump this time didn't offer any kind of economic rationale for the tariffs. His stated justification is to discipline Brazil for trying to prosecute his longtime ally and coup plotter, Jair Bolsonaro. He's also going after India, a purchaser of Russian oil, again with 50% tariffs. And his maneuvers might destabilize BRICS in the short term, but developing countries like Brazil and India have been preparing to spread their dependency and to other players for decades. And so China, India, and Russia, you guys might have seen a couple weeks ago, recently had a summit in Tianjin or something like that in China, again signaling the weakness of U.S. imperialism, which has had to use naked force more and more against developing economies, and these economies are turning to other places. In addition to the tariff war, Trump has used direct force in bombing Ukraine, and this week in the extrajudicial killing of 11 Venezuelans on a speedboat heading towards Trinidad, which has come up various times this weekend. It fits into a broader plan of militarizing America's borders and clawing back South America and the Middle East from China's influence. And at this point, I think I should mention that there are various other centerpieces to his policies that, not only serve as instruments to divide and crush the resistance, thereby making the U.S. a more attractive place to invest for capital, but it's not only a tool for that. I'm thinking of policies like mass deportations and racist, hateful, sexist ideologies. There are other things like that too that are just a point in themselves for the far right, constructing a white Christian ethno-state. And so, as of 2 weeks ago, 180,000 people, I believe, have been deported from the country, many of them being sent to countries that they have no connection to with horrible, brutal conditions, poverty, war, political persecution, and illegal detention. I think I tried to run the gamut of it. There are just too many developments and contingencies to name, but what I just tried to do is just to summarize some of the main developments and categorize them in terms of the roles that they're serving in helping Trump and the U.S. reestablish its dominance over the world. Now I wanted to turn to the question of reactions to Trump, starting with mainstream responses and then the actual resistance that the left needs to bet on in order to defeat his administration. So clearly, given how much damage Trump 2.0 has already done, it's already caused within the first 7 months only, the balance of power, everyone can infer, is not good. As you would expect, the Democrats, the party that fashions itself as the only possible opposition to Trump, it has offered no real resistance, and this is not just some sad coincidence or that they're out of form, that they're just kind of bad at their job. If we really understand what the Democrats are, a party of capital that historically has been funded and controlled by tech, Wall Street, and healthcare CEOs, we know that it's constitutionally incapable of standing up to Trump. In the wake of Trump's re-election, Senator Bernie Sanders offered a damning reflection on the state of the Democratic Party. I'll just read his quote right here. He says, "It should come as no great surprise that a Democratic Party which has abandoned working class people would find that the working class has abandoned them. Will the big money interests and well-paid consultants who control the Democratic Party learn any real lessons from this disastrous campaign?" And to answer his own question, he says, probably not. Generous. Well, why probably not? I mean, the answer can be simply put as the Democratic Party has the same masters, the same profit motive as the Republicans. They might dislike this or that aspect of Trump's program. They might disagree with the banning of books. They might disagree with the racist rhetoric and deportation of immigrants. But there are also many fundamental issues that make Trump's administration the wet dream of the Democratic Party donor class. And to think of it from the perspective of a healthcare CEO, yeah, maybe I don't like that, he's threatening my, racialized, workers, but I'm actually absolutely gleeful about the destruction of public health care options. My private business is going to make a windfall. I can deny all these trans kids life-saving health care. Sorry? Oh yeah, free Luigi. That's right. So, I don't want to suggest that there are no differences between the Democrats and the Republicans, but when it comes down to the issue of mustering a programmatic shift to the working class from swapping the Democratic Party's current, clientele of a whole constellation of NGOs and advocacy groups for its historic base of organized labor that it won because organized labor pushed it to adopt social democratic policies, that Democratic Party absolutely will not do that because it would require biting the hand that feeds it. So in the absence of programmatic changes, the only thing the Democrats can do is just formal and symbolic protests. For example, there have been some skirmishes in the lead up to the 2026 midterm elections these past few weeks. This is mostly taken place in the realm of redistricting. So the way that works is that electoral districts in the U.S. are typically redrawn after every census, so every 10 years. But Republicans in Texas have been proposing new electoral maps between censuses to snub Democrats in the upcoming midterms in 2026. So recently, Texas Democrats walked out for a couple weeks, escaping to Illinois, but came back after both a series of Republican threats, but also the promise of Democrats kind of sniping back at them by doing a redistricting process of their own. So, for instance, Gavin Newsom, my governor in California, he's appearing to position himself for a 2028 run. He's the main kind of guy in the media associated with any kind of fight against Trump, and what he's done is sign a bill containing a new congressional map that would put more liberal voters in Republican districts. And so Californians now, after he signed this thing, will have a chance to vote on this referendum, and if it passes, it's going to offset the redistricting that's happening in Texas. And what this redistricting battle shows is that there are immense limits to what the Democratic Party leadership has to offer. They're not talking about universal health care, child care, or rent freeze, cheaper groceries. The best response that they can come up to is drawing different lines on a map. So it's a really crazy situation for a party that is facing a voter registration crisis. For the first time since 2018, more people are signing up for the Republicans than the Democrats, and so long as nothing fundamental changes, we can expect that decline to continue. The Democrats represent the main flank of opposition, I think, to Trump at the level of bourgeois politics, and that's really no opposition at all. But in terms of Trump's base, we're starting to notice a few cracks and splinters. I think the big, beautiful bill was Trump's greatest kind of stressor. There were several reasons that made the bill hard to stomach for different sectors of his base. So, for one, some Republicans in vulnerable districts just simply could not afford passing a bill that would gut Medicaid. Others couldn't afford to trash the green subsidies, the green capitalist subsidies that Biden had guaranteed for EV production, for example. And then the final kind of part of that split is that fiscal hawks, including Elon Musk, opposed the bill on the grounds that it would contribute massively to the U.S.'s debt. And in Musk's view, this should have been a reason for even more billions and billions in cuts to social services. There have been some other episodes too. I think in the opening panel, someone mentioned Jeffrey Epstein, the American financier and just horrible sex offender trafficker who Trump was friends with, and surely whose crimes he covered up. This has been, a long-standing issue for Trump's base, who elected Trump kind of on the promise that Trump would go after the American deep state and expose all the different conspiracies of our government. Another flashpoint has been Trump's handling of natural disasters. So I think in July there were massive floods that swept through central Texas, killing dozens and dozens of children and civilians. And right now there's like a huge battle to interpret why it was as devastating as it was, whether Republican attacks on climate and disaster relief initiatives contributed to the death toll. So there are more scandals and splinters that I'm sure I'm not thinking of, but it's clear that none of these things on their own or together have really amounted to anything capable of stopping Trump, because perhaps, again, even though there are reasons to critique various aspects of what he's doing, the new situation of deregulation of attacks on workers, plus the seriousness with which Trump is trying to restore American profitability and dominance, still makes him capital's best bet in a lot of ways. So by now, it's become clear to many of us, not just those on the left, but just masses of ordinary Americans as well, that neither the Democrats nor the few legal checks and balances that exist in our political system are capable of stopping Trump. The hard part, though, is not saying that. It's to build a mass independent, left-wing alternative. And so for the remainder of my time, I'm just going to try to talk about how that's been developing, both under Trump 2.0, but in a more, historical sense as well, as the U.S. left is recomposing itself. So first, to tackle the more immediate question of resistance to Trump, unlike Trump's first administration, the resistance this time has taken a really long time to express itself. So if you remember the last time Trump took office, on the day of his inauguration, 5 million people descended on the White House, whereas this time I think it was like a crowd of 5,000, so something really negligible. And I think it's important to take a second to interpret what that means, rather than like lack of critical opinion or support for his program. I think what that signals is a really profound kind of exhaustion and disillusionment on the part of American public. So, for example, if you talk to a lot of people, whether they be student protesters or people who went out against Trump last time, there's a really familiar anecdote. We went to the street, we did this every month, but look what happened. Nothing happened, actually, and so why would I do this again? Trump this time was very effective and smart. He adopted a very effective shock and awe strategy, fighting on so many different fronts at once and so readily mobilizing repressive state structures that people were too scared to go at him on day one. And many of us still are for good reason. Look at the deportations and the rest taking place. So this time, the resistance has really accumulated over the past couple months as opposed to days or weeks. First, we saw some small signs at Republican and Democratic town halls, even Republicans, veterans, protesting the party for taking away their health care. Then we started seeing something really important, some resistance being led by the more progressive elements of the Democratic Party. So Bernie Sanders and AOC, perhaps the most well-known left-wing figures nationally, did this thing called the Fight the Oligarchy Tour. It started really small on the East Coast. It was just like a couple hundred people. I forget, maybe it was Boston where it kicked off or something like that. And then it culminated in 36,000 in LA. And these were really great because I think just like, what brought me to the left, Bernie's initial presidential campaigns, he's really good at pointing his fingers at the right people, pointing his fingers at the oligarchy. But one challenge of it was that it was really organizationally thin in terms of what you could do if you support Medicare for all, college for all these things. What group are you going to join? What kind of, how are you going to fight for your demands? But this still was a very important starting point, I think, for the broad resistance. Simultaneously, there were mass street mobilizations that happened, a couple of months in, around really symbolic days. There were three that come to mind for me. The first one was called Hands Off. This was planned by kind of like progressive Democratic Party grassroots groups. Maybe I won't bore you with the names, but the theme of it was just hands off blank. And so obviously you can see how this is such a big unifying thing. You can fill in the blank however you want. Hands off immigrants, hands off students, hands off free speech, etc. So I think the broad political idea there has a lot of power. There was also simultaneously after that, or not simultaneously after that, a month after that, something called No King's Day, which I talked about a couple days ago. It was on Trump's birthday. He planned this huge military celebration in D.C. It was a very symbolic day. I think maybe 10 to 15 million, I want to say, took to the streets across the country. So a huge number. I think just a couple million short of what we saw during BLM. And then a few weeks after that, there were huge anti-ICE confrontations emerging out of LA, which obviously is the epicenter of the fight for immigrants, LA being a very diverse community, right, very close to the border, with a very long tradition of immigrant struggle dating back decades. You can hear about high school students and current high school students. Their parents also took part in organizing something called blowouts. Just huge mobilizations and walkouts from high schools in defense of immigrant rights. And so obviously it was symbolic for that reason too, to crush the backbone of the resistance. And on top of these things, there have been a really diverse array of union and community-led initiatives. Usually pretty local, either sanctuary union efforts to do political education inside unions to declare we're going to defend our immigrant members. There's immigrant defense, rapid response kind of mobilizations being organized by unions or community groups. There's a lot of different mutual aid networks. And lastly, one of the most recent victories is Zohran's primary win. Zohran Mamdani, a very young, progressive Muslim immigrant from Uganda, ran an insurgent mayoral campaign in the financial and cultural capital of the U.S. The stakes went so far beyond beating this pervert, Andrew Cuomo, who's got a lot of different, charges against him. It's way bigger than that. We're beating the Democratic Party establishment, I think, in the midst of a genocide, just all the horrible shit, we see going on in the world. Zohran's victory lit a spark of hope. It said the left is still here. We're not dead. We're still here. We're still fighting, and we're fighting to win. And it's lit a spark of hope in people around the world. I talked to people at this conference or other leftists, and one of the first words out of their mouth is Zohran Mamdani. It was simultaneously, I think, a rebuke of the Trump administration and the false choice presented by the 2024 presidential elections. Zohran's victory really upended the conventional wisdom of political commentators and even the left's own expectations about what's possible in a defensive moment when we lead with a real working class program, a strong media game, and even stronger grassroots mobilization. So Zohran's victory also builds on these struggles. And maybe lastly, the last element I'll mention is DSA and a growing vision around 2028. So the number, or the year 2028, has a lot of resonance in labor-left debates in the U.S. right now. It might sound strange because it's really far away. Why are we talking about 2028 when Trump is destroying, everyone in 2025? Is there going to be a 2028? But it's far away, but it's gained objective reality because of a call made by United Auto Workers President Shawn Fain, the leader of the most historic, progressive, powerful union in our country that has recently undergone a significant, though still incomplete, democratic reform process, but basically called for all these different union locals to align their contract expiration dates, obviously alluding to a mass general strike on May Day in 2028. And so this is a huge thing that the left is planning for right now. There are different May Day coalitions in different cities to do kind of rehearsal runs in the lead up to that. So this May Day, for example, there are walkouts, there are all different kinds of union actions, and there's more and more of a collective spirit to coordinating union struggles, although it has to be not just from the treetops, from union presidents and high-profile people like Shawn Fain, but it has to be a grassroots mass effort as well. I'll say that's one of the bright spots, in addition to, I think, DSA, the largest socialist organization in our country, just recommitted itself to the fight for a better world. We had a convention a couple weeks ago at the beginning of August where we made had some really important debates and had some important stances come out of that. And all of these things that I just mentioned, these different aspects of how the resistance has been growing, deserve their own specific analysis. Maybe I could try to do that if we have time, or we could do that in the discussion later. Still got 10 minutes. Okay, cool. Or actually, there's a lot to talk through, so maybe I'll keep pushing on. But maybe to synthesize some of the victories and challenges of what all these different things represent, I think, like I was mentioning in some of my comments the other night, I think underlying all these different episodes and developments, we are looking at a resistance that is really young and diverse. It's in solidarity with Palestine, the most pressing anti-imperialist struggle of our time. A lot of these groups are politically open, searching for new ideas. There are activists in the U.S., if you just look at myself, we're really young. And so we have to be really ecumenical and open to inspiration from all over the world, because there's not a lot of tradition that we inherited. Despite these, I think, positive aspects, I think there's some big challenges right now. So one of them being that all these different forms of resistance are very fragmented. The participants of these struggles overlap in a lot of places, but for example, I being a DSA member, I'm also a union activist. I also support different kinds of social movements, go to these kinds of mobilizations. That being said, the political strategy and democratic life of all the different organizations and groups participating in the resistance, these things are developing completely divorced from each other. It's not like DSA is really in a room with unions and other social movement groups to say, like, what's our collective strategy for fighting Trump under what demands and so on and so forth. So yeah, that's a huge challenge for us, building a bold vision for how to cohere that space, have ideas about what social forces we bring together, and on what programmatic basis. So some major tasks for us right now are, one, to unite and politicize struggles. I think Trump's attacks on all of society, domestically, internationally, are turbocharging the need to unify and politicize. I think everyone sees that it's not sufficient just to keep our heads down doing the kind of like slow, trade union work, or have that trade union mindset of only fighting for new unions or, better protections at, our university or whatever. These things are very important, but that's obviously not sufficient to respond to the scale of the challenge that we've been given. So we need to figure out how to develop a class-wide collective response, figure out which kind of dots that we connect, or build new dots to actually connect, Secondly, I think there's a huge debate right now over the theme of organizational flexibility. And so just to maybe put some meat on the bones, or to give some context of what I mean by that, most people on the left today are very young, and a lot of people, their entire political lives have taken place in an organization, DSA, or not everyone, but a lot of people. And so I think, having your entire political life taking place in only one organization kind of sometimes lends itself to the idea that that's the only vehicle that you can use to wage a struggle. And so people's understandable instinct when, trying to build different struggles, to build a resistance against the Trump, is to say, join DSA. I think this makes sense as a call to a very specific layer of the resistance, but by and large, most people in society are not socialist. They're not going to join a socialist organization. It's very far-fetched. If I can't even do this small thing in my life, if I can't even get this pothole fixed on my street, why am I joining a socialist organization and saying things like democratize the economy? It's understandable why people have this attitude. And so right now, one big contention that different parts of DSA have, or different parts of the left, is that sometimes we need to be more flexible about the kinds of organizations that we use to build struggles. And so I'll give you an example of what this looks like. So in terms of the student front of resistance to Trump, one thing that some left groups are attempting right now are to build student unions. This is a common thing in other countries, whether you look at Latin America, Western Europe. They have these organizations that are their purpose is to organize the entire student body in struggle against the administration. This is like a form of organization that really hasn't existed in the US, which has student governments that are just arms of the administration. And we see a lot of value in this, just as in the same way we see a lot of value in organizing trade unions, even though they're not revolutionary organizations. Why? Because they bring a lot of people together, the exact people that we need to be in opposition to Trump and in fighting for over people's immediate needs and demands, whether that be higher wages or stop getting get my PI, my principal investigator. This is a term for like a supervisor in academic research, just to get this person to stop harassing me in the struggle for these immediate needs. People's ideas about what's possible and the power that they have can expand, and that's a good foothold for them, or a good on-ramp to even greater comprehensive struggles and ideas like socialism. And so I think this is also a potent lesson that we drew from experiences like Black Lives Matter and the abortion rights fights too. So these were huge mobilizations in American society. I think over 20 million people took to the streets for Black Lives Matter. But in retrospect, when we kind of do the balance sheet of that experiences, we didn't win a lot of structural gains. A lot of people mobilized, but where are they now? A lot of them are not part of organizations anymore, developing as activists or continuing to mobilize for and black rights, and that's a shame. I think part of that layer could be captured by saying, like, DSA cares a lot about black liberation, you should join us, but by and large, it's a huge missed opportunity when American society lacks these mass democratic organizations that are laser focused on the issues that people care about. We need to run campaigns constantly for black rights, for abortion rights, for LGBTQ rights, and it's a shame that these broader transitional spaces do not exist. And so that's another impetus to creating these things. And in terms of how they relate to the fight against Trump, it shows up in a lot of different places. One of the big discourses right now about how to keep the base that's been activated through Zoran's campaign still mobilized past the election date is to say, hey Zoran, look at these tens of thousands of people that are around you right now that are so inspired by your program. You should launch an organization called, Make New York Affordable, or Make an Affordable New York, or something like that, to keep people who care about your program campaigning and laser focused on these things and still fighting instead of just voting for you and then just disappearing into the ether, And this would be a different kind of solution than saying join DSA. Again, we shouldn't be afraid to say join DSA. We definitely should. But, how do we get the tens of thousands of people who have been activated through Zoran's campaign to stay active? How do we get the taxi drivers that we've met, from all these different ethnic enclaves of New York to stay active when joining DSA is not the most, attractive thing to them at this moment? So that's the second kind of debate, and I think strategic hurdle for the U.S. left is the organizational flexibility question. Last thing I'll say is that the U.S. left really needs to reckon with imperialism. The debate amongst the left right now is really stuck at a moralistic level. It's really good to say imperialism is bad. That's important to say, but it's, our work is much more complex than that. One kind of resonance of how important this theme is just to look at the labor movement. So since Trump imposed his tariffs, the leading lights of the UAW, the guy I mentioned before, Shawn Fain, has popularized this slogan of strategic tariffs, saying that actually these tariffs could be good for bringing back U.S. manufacturing. Even if it is, you think about the flip side of that. In order to accomplish that, he's got to destroy the labor movement. And so I think these claims are pretty dubious, but the consciousness of how this impacts people internationally, just the absence of words like an international working class movement, capital controls, international collective agreements, even as like horizons in the discourse is a huge lack on our part. And so there's a lot of education and also a lot of stuff like this that needs to happen, I think, to get over, I think, what's always been the litmus test for the revolutionary left, which is fighting imperialism. So yeah, I want to name those as the main strategic hurdles, but our work is cut out for us, and we're not yet, responding on the scale that's needed. But I think there are a lot of reasons for hope, and I guess one way to tackle that or to illustrate that is just to look at the example of DSA. Not that DSA is like Jesus or anything, or that I want to like put it up on a pedestal, but I think its story is actually really inspiring and indicative of something. So, like I mentioned before, the U.S. left is really young. It has the U.S. left generally has a very admirable and an impactful history on world politics. But the generation that's fighting today did not, inherit the gains of the past in any systematic, robust way. So most of the veterans of the U.S. left that you'll meet today just have 10 or less years of experience. The U.S. left really started 10 years ago off the backs of Bernie's presidential campaigns, Jacobin magazine reading groups, solidarity with mass strikes by educators, healthcare workers. And those processes really created the space for class politics actually to resurface in American society again. And it created space for new, energetic left-wing activists and to establish the DSA, the Democratic Socialists of America, as a pole for the left, whereas basically none had existed before. It was just the political wilderness with the existence of like tiny, small, dogmatic sects here and there. So the growth of DSA, for all its faults, of which there are many, as I've learned through hard experience, has been one of the most precious advances for the international left, given the strategic importance of fighting capitalism in the belly of the beast. And though DSA is not a decisive national force, it's a significant player in many different processes, from what I just named, Iran, to union reform struggles. For example, I and some other comrades in DSA and my tendency, Brendan Rose's, waged a struggle internally within the UAW to win the right of all members to elect the top leadership. We elected a reform leadership that has good progressive policies and is only valuable insofar as it, really inspires more struggles from below. But it's a new day in the UAW. In 2023, we waged a strike against the three biggest audio manufacturers in North America. And just like the consequences of that have been great. We have more context than we know what to do with. And strategically, politically, we're not exactly prepared, but there are so many different people to win over their hearts and minds. Comrades in YDSA and Brendan Rose's helped lead the first pro-Palestine encampment in San Francisco that forced their school to divest from arms manufacturers and Israeli companies. So what I'm saying all this for is just to show that compared to 10 years ago, the left in the U.S. is much more rooted and present across a diversity of struggles, whether they be union struggles, tenant struggles, LGBTQ people, youth fights, and these things have really important implications for our political ideas, for our recruitment, who joins DSA, and any mass left-wing alternative that we can build with DSA and other groups, and it also changes the quality of the leadership that we've been able to develop. And so that's why we have to keep betting on the grassroots mobilization, on working people's abilities to solve their own problems, to create more and more of these people who are going to point a way forward out of this mess. So I'll end there. Yeah.
Cyn Huang, everybody. Alrighty. I very much look forward to sharing winning strategies for keeping activated people involved between the two of us as we are sort of facing that challenge at the moment past our own federal election, obviously on a smaller scale, but yeah. So if we're going to hand around that sign-up sheet now. If you haven't put your name down yet, I'm looking at a bunch of you and I can almost guarantee that you're almost all on it. But, just in case, that activist calendar will drop into your inbox 1 to 2 times a week with anything going on in your area. Alrighty. So we'll move on to a Q&A now. I'm going to take people 3 at a time. So if you would like to ask a question, alrighty. We're going to go with 1, 2, 3 to start. And yeah, let's go.
Thanks so much, Cyn. There is so much to talk about. And it's good that you've spoken more than once at the conference, because I think we need to have a few goes at it just to cover the breadth and the depth of the situation in the US. And I guess I was just thinking, because you talked about possibilities for organising broad fronts with other groups in passing just towards the end there, and I am curious about that, because of course we've been very excitedly following the growth of the DSA here in Australia, and obviously that's why we invited you to come here, because we can see that the important role that DSA is playing in the US. I guess I would appreciate hearing your thoughts about other forces on the left, and in the, if you like, the social vanguard in the US, and what the role of, say, events like the Socialism Conference in Chicago play, in your view, in terms of gathering together some of those potential social forces, you know, looking towards the future and collaboration and building those broad united fronts that you talked about. And as well, events like Labour Notes, which I know you've attended in the past. I think it's only held once every 2 years, and there'll be one coming up, I think 2026. It seems to me, just from reports I've read about it, that it has played a very useful role in terms of that cross-connectivity between the labour movement and the left more broadly. And I guess given in the US context, where the labour movement's quite different to what it is here in Australia, where we have, you know, industry unions, whereas in the US you've got this sort of interesting phenomenon where you can have a local of the UAW, the United Auto Workers, organising university tutors on a campus. Now, you know, that's quite odd for us here. But, you know, it seems to me I can understand why the UAW is quite an important union in terms of not just the auto workers and the auto industry, but actually across sectors. And so I would also appreciate, sorry, this is a bit of a questions, too many questions, your thoughts on, I guess, the other players inside the labour movement. I know the Teamsters, the leadership of the Teamsters have come behind Trump, but I know that there are locals within the Teamsters who I'm sure are not pro-Trump. So what kind of debates and fights are going on within some of the other unions around the question of fighting back? Thanks.
I think it's essential to be working with other groups in the movement, to have a united front. In WA, we're a small city over there, and our SA group had to work with lots of different groups in order to achieve our common goals. We absolutely had to. It was essential, and we did. In a lot of cases, we made some major changes in you know, and it was great to be a part of that. I feel over here we tend not to, and I think we're also very influenced by capitalism ourselves. We're products of it. We can't help it. A lot of us from wealthy private school backgrounds, university, and we often feel a bit funny about allowing the proletariat into our groups. You know, we sort of have a bit of the plum in the mouth. And I think, you know, to have a true socialist win, you've got to get over that. You've got to not just talk socialism, you've got to do socialism, be socialism. And often people just talk it, but don't do it. So I think it's great, and you absolutely have to connect with other groups. And one group that I think is important is veterans in America, because they're the ones being affected, and they have influence, perhaps, hopefully, in the military, because you really need that right now. The military could be an important, crucial element in the whole thing. And also, this is another part of I was wondering if there's anything going on with that, but also with Mandani and what Trump is trying to do to him by isolating New York and saying that any group that supports him won't get funding, government funding. I'd like to know if there's a strategy with that, and if it involves perhaps connecting with all the other governors like California and I just can't remember some of the other ones, if they can get together in solidarity. Okay. The first part of the last question. Shit. Do you mean the one about the veterans? All right. What is there a strategy or any ideas on how to tackle what Trump is doing there? And you know, if it involves other governors all getting together or other, you know, to support New York. And also, oh shit, I've got a bit of a hangover, hang on. It's gone, it's coming. Just lost it again. Shut up. And it was something to do, yes. Trump was recently found by a judge that what he's doing, creating the military groups that he is, how he's turning it around and creating his own little army, that's actually illegal in the Constitution. And how can that be perhaps incorporated into the whole thing? Thank you.
Hi, Cyn. Thank you so much. I think a similar questioning theme. You know, we're also depressed at seeing what's going on over there. That we're pretty joyous to hear that there is some form of resistance. I guess my question is, so we have very similar, you know, capitalist monopoly over our two major parties. You know, we find Labor has pretty much, you know, betrayed us like the Democrats in America. Can you maybe explain what DSA's relationship now is with Bernie Sanders and AOC? Because, you know, the original election, they came across as the, you know, the ray of hope of true socialists, especially AOC being the young working class. And of course, we understood as soon as they ran Hillary and not Sanders, we understood where they lay in the Democratic Party. But I still find it really strange how they stay with the Democratic Party and are still trying to put forward that. Yeah, so if you can just explain relationship, how DCA deal with them, take them and their place in destroying the socialist resurgence. Thanks.
Okay. I might be rambly, but I think I got all the questions this time, so I'll just try to take them in order. The first question was about broad fronts and kind of characterizing more aspects of the American kind of labor-left ecosystem. So you're totally right. DSA is not the only player in town, and we are actually so thankful about that because DSA by itself cannot respond to everything all at once. It doesn't have the people or the the political power and capital. So in terms of other socialist groups, there been groups that have existed. Some have been around for a while. Others are new developments. I'm thinking of parties like the Party for Socialism and Liberation. There's something called Socialist Alternative, which is associated with a very high-profile councilwoman, former councilwoman, Cyn Huang in Seattle. A lot of these groups, I would say, are more democratic centralist, closed off kind of line parties. Some of them have more structured relationships with DSA, others don't. So, for example, there was a group of socialists who recently left Socialist Alternative to join DSA a couple of years ago. They're now a caucus within it called Reform and Alliance. And I think kind of like the growth and existence of DSA has been a huge political point that every single socialist group needs to figure out where they stand on. And one big lesson, I think, from the ISO years, which, by the way, if you look at, I imagine maybe Socialist Alliance potentially had a relationship with the US ISO. You guys know about the Socialism Conference. You guys have gone to it. Maybe had some exchanges with some of its members. And on paper, I would say Brendan Rose's, like where we stand, much more closely mirrors what the ISO's program was. But It was hard for them, in addition to dealing with the scandals that helped do them in. First of all, those scandals existed for a long time, but what really, sunk the boat was the fact that DSA arose as like a new pole in society. And so I think a lot of these groups, are recalculating how they position themselves or where exactly they want to work in these coming years, as we're starting to see more internal tendencies of DSA float up. In terms of non-socialist groups, there are a lot of different things. So labor notes, I think, is one of the best, probably the brightest spot in the U.S. kind of like political terrain. It was actually a legacy and a product of the work of a group called the International Socialists, which Bread and Roses loosely inherits and is very inspired by. It was created in 1979 as like this transitional space to connect all the examples of rank and file militancy that still existed in U.S. society as we were noticing the collapse of the left. And it serves a different, it serves a very special purpose. Its job is to, train anybody who wants to fight the boss. It doesn't really matter your ideology. It wasn't supposed to be a socialist organization, although socialists had a very, big role in forming this organization and making it run. But anybody, regardless of your politics, if you want fight for better wages, no matter how, modest your demands, this is the organization you can turn to, and it'll teach you. It'll give you important organizing methodology skills. They've written, tons of books about how to organize in your union, how to analyze your workplace, how to talk to your coworkers, and more than that, they, in addition to like political education, they do some other things. They have the best rank and file labor reporting, I think, maybe potentially in the world. So they're so well connected that like if there's a labor struggle happening in the U.S., I think within the day they could probably get connected and not just get a labor reporter to say something about it, but get one of the workers of the struggle to share their experience, to share the challenges they faced and how they got through them. And then the comrade mentioned that every 2 years they hold an international conference. They also do more frequent regional ones. And last one was over 4,000 people, 40 plus countries in attendance, and it's really great because it's like kind of plays the same role as some parties do. It's like a collective like repository for all the experiences of our class. So for example, an education worker in LA who wants to build union reform struggles can connect with teachers in Chicago and in New York City who had successful examples of doing that and learn from them. Or my union, UAW, people who wanted reform and democracy in the UAW could connect there, and then coming out of the Labor Notes Conference formed a game plan for demands that they could support in the international union to change things. And we're seeing similar things play out across other unions as well. In addition to like this labor organization, although it's not a labor union itself, we have like social movement allies. Like I said in the talk, they don't really exist with respect to like things like black rights as much or abortion struggles, but around Palestine we have a lot of different Palestinian organizations, Arab organizations that DSA is increasingly working with. I'm thinking of PYM, Palestinian Youth Movement, for example, that recently came to our convention, is waging a really great battle for labor for an arms embargo right now. And then, just one highlight from the recent DSA convention is that I think we took an important step at trying to make more concrete around what collaboration between all these different forces look like. And so the other day I mentioned that one new component of DSA convention was holding this cross-organizational exchange. This never happened before. Like, we've never put all these different people in a room. Actually, we had no idea who to put in a room. So it was just as simple as just like, as humble as like going onto a spreadsheet, just mapping out kind of different communications DSA has had over the past couple of years, mapping out the relationships of our members, cold calling a bunch of different organizations saying, would you be interested in joining a DSA conference where we're going to discuss united action around Trump in 2028 and the potential of forming a working class party. Discussion did not get far at all, but that's totally okay for a first meeting of its kind. In my experience, what it proved is that we learned about who is in the orbit of DSA. I think just hearing people's responses to these questions about 2028 and Trump, we were, if we sit with it and think really intentionally, I think there are a lot of different examples of different struggles to connect. I imagine coming out of convention in the next couple of years, we'll see labor and different political organizations unite over anti-capitalist candidates to support. Different labor unions right now are working on aligning contract expiration dates or building cross-union fights against the state. For example, in California, a lot of stuff is happening over there. Comrade also asked about the state of the U.S. labor movement. I think, this is a really tough question. I mean, one way to assess the advance of the labor movement is just to examine the state of debates like 5 years ago. So 5 years ago, Bread and Roses was trying to popularize amongst socialists the rank and file strategy that socialists need to, that we need to bridge the left and the labor movement, that socialists can't just be cheering from the sidelines. We have to be part and parcel of the working class's struggles, and a huge tactic of that is, socialists getting jobs in strategic sectors of industry, and hopefully in a sustainable, non-sectarian way, and helping workers' wage struggles for their demands, and through that process, I think, coming to more radical horizons. And so 5 years ago, this was all to say that this was very aspirational. DSA was on the outside looking in, not just DSA, most of the left. But with the years that have passed by, I think the aspirational kind of tone has gone away, and maybe not gone away. I think the intervention that socialists need to be well-rooted, it always needs to be made, but here's what's happened in the past couple of years. DSA now boasts like a rank-and-file activist network across a bunch of different industries: education, healthcare, logistics. We're not just in unions, we're actually doing stuff in unions. So, there's been a huge wave of self-organization of young people at workplaces like Starbucks, even at Amazon. That's obviously just a paramount company to organize, the logistics chains too. We are playing a huge role, I think, in union reform movements, not just the UAW that I mentioned before. That one's one of the most important, given that the UAW has a huge membership, has a lot of resources, a shit ton of power, given where it's placed in the economy. We've won some reform battles that have made possible more successful battles against the boss that have inspired and rallied the class, not just in the U.S., but across different sectors and all over the world. But right now, especially with Trump in office, we're kind of confronting the limits of a very incomplete union reform process. So, for example, just to take my union or the Teamsters as a metric, in the Teamsters, similar to the UAW, we won, direct elections for a membership. We got a so-called reform slate to the top of the Teamsters. The Teamsters president, you guys might know, spoke at the RNC, the Republican National Convention, has made a bunch of overtures to Trump, and some of that probably reflects the business unionist, history and tradition that he comes from. But I don't think you have to look at it super cynically to understand the challenge that we're facing. So both Sean Fain and I think Sean O'Brien, the Teamsters president, reflect one and the same problem, which is the limits of having progressive or maybe less than progressive union leaders at the top of some really important unions, but they don't have a mass, engaged, politicized rank and file base for the, clamoring at the bottom. And so, the limits of that are clear. What that looks like in the Teamsters is a president who is making these very perhaps rational calculations that the best way to save my members from Trump is to make these, overtures, say nice things to him, to go to the RNC to speak, and I'm going to sell out the rest of the labor movement, if need be. That's the most conservative expression of this problem. The more progressive expression of the problem is what we see in the UAW. We have a president that's actually kind of ahead of his membership. He calls for a ceasefire in Gaza, labor for arms embargoes, a discourse in the union. But is he using his office to empower more struggles for blow? Is the UAW ready to strike for Gaza? Hell no. It's so the reform process really, really needs to be deep, and it's not going to be solved by having some great voices at the top. As important as that is, it's night and day in the union to have a president that's not embezzling our funds to put him, send himself on golf trips. He's actually talking about Gaza. That's been great, but that's not the measure of our success. The measure of our success is stopping the genocide. And so in order to transform the UAW in a vehicle to doing that, there's no shortcuts. We have to organize the base as well, do a huge awareness education campaign amongst our coworkers, build struggles that help them understand their own power, that teach them to fight not only for better contracts, but to fight for huge social issues like Gaza. And so lots of improvements, but a long way to go. The next question was about, the comrade mentioned having some really great experiences building United Front and WA. Sorry, I'm not familiar with what that is, but you also said something really important. Western Australia, cool. And you also mentioned the importance of supporting veterans in America. I totally agree. No points there. I mean, it's a huge radicalizing front of American society right now, given the scales of the attacks facing them. They were one of the first targets of Trump, and actually one of the first spots of the resistance, as I mentioned before, with even Republican veterans, staging huge protests at Republican town halls. So potent, in fact, that Republicans are refusing to do town halls anymore. And yeah, the importance of it's clear. We need, given the role that the military plays in society, especially their repressive role right now in deporting immigrants and policing protests, we have to change people's hearts and minds. And so one of the nice developments, things that gives us hope right now, is the emergence of this group called the FUN, the Federal Unionist Network. It's a group of federal workers that cuts across so many different agencies. One comrade of ours, Mark Smith, who's works in the VA, Veteran Affairs, is a leader from San Francisco, and so right now they're just working night and day trying to identify, their federal worker comrades. They're running trainings to help federal workers run issue campaigns. I think there are huge strategic hurdles that I don't have the answer to right now. For example, Trump is itching for a federal workers strike, so he can just fire them all, and so. There's a long way, there's a lot of different ideas and struggles to develop, but this group is quite dynamic. It, unfolded kind of on a whim, and it's growing a lot day by day. Next question was, is there oh God, my handwriting's bad. The Mamdani question, is there a strategy or ideas for how to tackle Trump, especially in a collective way? Well, the sad thing about that is, you mentioned governors, the hard thing is that, of course, Mamdani, a self-proclaimed Democratic Socialist, even one that's trying to, I think sadly, position himself as the new face of the Democratic Party, he's not going to enjoy institutional support from anybody, from the Democratic Party especially. The Democratic Party has a long history of, screwing over progressive movements. It doesn't matter if they're one of their own, and that's why it's earned the label of the graveyard of social movements. And just recently, we've seen so many examples to that effect. Someone mentioned, Bernie waging an insurgent primary campaign, 2016, 2020, and then all of them immediately coalesced behind Hillary. Recently in Minneapolis, this young progressive, not an immigrant, but racialized man as well, won, I think, the primary in Minneapolis, and the Democratic Party tried to cannibalize him, saying these results were insufficient or fraudulent. We got to support the Democratic Party incumbent, and so it hasn't really played out super differently with Mamdani. The leading lights of the Democratic Party in New York are on record saying that they're going to oppose his program. The governor, Kathy Hochul, says, God, there's no way in hell that there's going to be, taxes on the rich to fund universal child care or public transit and things of that sort. So the answer has to come from us. And one thing that has given me hope is that I think now with socialists having a deeper electoral bench and not just electoral officials, but a better sense of how to use elected officials' platform to organize political work, we're planning for a socialist elected activist conference, I think, within the next year to bring together, the dozens and I think over 100, 200 kind of elected officials that DSA has gathered over the city, but it's not going to be limited to that. It's anybody, who opposes Trump and stands for a working class program. We're going to have a conference together to figure out what steps we can take collectively. Unfortunately, I can't speak more concretely than that, but this is the first time we've even formed an intention like that. And so I think with careful planning and more experiences fighting from these elected officials and the movements powering them, it could be a really potent thing. The next question was, my handwriting again. Trump's kind of confrontations with the legal system. So, this is a really vexed question. A lot of people hold out hope for the legal system since Trump does a million different illegal things, but I think as everyone's learned that it's, one, we have to use any foothold we got to fight Trump, and so I'm glad that there are legal checks and balances that stand in place. It's good that unions and social movements are filing, lawsuits against him, but I think we have to acknowledge that's only one prong of the strategy and one very limited prong of the strategy, especially since we know that Trump doesn't care about legality and also poses a political problem for us. The social program that we stand for, it's not just about more faithfully interpreting the Constitution. When we look at the things which has happened to the Venezuelans on the boat, we don't oppose it just because it happened in international waters. We opposed it because we oppose U.S. imperialism, the fact that the U.S. gets to dictate and indiscriminately kill and sanction and torture and terrify people around the world. And so I think it's good when, courts are ruling in favor of, academic freedom at Harvard, that the tariffs are illegal, that other things are, but we have to understand that legality and morality in society is a reflection of the balance of power, and Trump is doing everything he can to change the balance of power in his favor. And so it's not this static thing that we can just appeal to enforce our rights. We have to actively defend them. And the last question was about DSA's relationship to Bernie and AOC. So yeah, this is a complicated one. Bernie and AOC are examples, are the best-known examples of DSA elected officials. I think the higher up you go in terms of endorsements from local to state to federal, the more dubious, the more tenuous the relationship with DSA is. Because the American left is so young, I would say, like, as compared especially to places like Brazil or more long-standing socialist parties and other parts of the world, we have elected officials that are not at all organic to organizations, socialist or otherwise. These are more so like left celebrities who take good positions, who have created mass processes around them, like Bernie. I'm so thankful for him for doing that. But he's by no means, I think, the standard for what a socialist elected should be doing. I think a lot of our training here suggests that we want socialist politicians who view themselves as organizers first and legislators second, and people who should be taking leadership from working class movements, from socialist parties. This is not at all the case for Bernie and AOC. It's one thing to say that, and to an extent they probably know that we have this criticism of them. Actually, they definitely do, but from their standpoint, not to endorse they're doing this, but to understand their rationale for it. Bernie and AOC probably look at DSA as like kind of like a incoherent mess that's actually really maybe not great to relate to when they're doing a cost-benefit analysis. DSA takes its endorsement seriously. Sometimes we unendorse people who fall short of our ideals. Why would I sully myself with that as an elected and create a scandal around myself when I fall short of DSA's program? I'd much rather have them as like a, my grassroots mobilization support base come election time, but I don't want the superstructured relationship to them. It's really incoherent. There's so much faction fighting. Why would I want that? And so in order to qualitatively change the relationship of politicians to DSA, we have to wage the battle of ideas for what we expect our politicians to do. Expect them to coordinate more, to cross-endorse each other, to adopt the DSA brand, working class demands, to run on the same, program. We should definitely do that, but there's also a long-term thing that we need to do that there's no shortcuts for. We need to build struggles that produce leaders who are politicized around what elected should be doing. And to an extent that Zoran is good, that he's an improvement on these officials that came before him, it's a reflection of the fact that his credentials come from building a Students for Justice in Palestine chapter at university. Through those struggles, you definitely learn about the bankruptcy of the Democratic Party. It comes from his more organic relationship to DSA, being in an organization that relentlessly tells you about the fact that as a lone official, you cannot accomplish anything on your own. You need to build popular power outside the state to enforce a program, and that there needs to be, a collectively set strategy. And so it's our job to build struggles, to build organizations that actually deeply convince people of these ideas.
Thank you. I think we... Is that a hand up for a question, or are you... Okay. I think we have time for one more round of questions. Does it wrap up at 4 or 4:15? 4:15? Not a problem. All right, I'll take another round of questions then. Let's go Coral, Rachel, and Jacob.
Yes, thanks for the talk. It's quite interesting. I've been following the situation in America quite deeply, but I was just wondering what the DSA is doing to attract women, because women are under attack. The lack of medical access to Medicaid, the lack of access to abortion, and the whole thing of the Epstein factor. With I think 1,000 women came to the press conference that the victims gave in front of the in front of the White House a couple of days ago. I mean, the Epstein factor can bring down Trump, because it's a huge exposure of the total moral corruption and barbarity and a horrendous attack. What they did to women is just, in the last 10, 20 years. And obviously Trump was part of all of that whole process with Epstein. So I think mobilising women is a really important part of this whole process of getting them active and involved and fighting for their rights. It's half the population. the other thing I was wondering about is ICE. I mean, they're a horrendous force. I mean, I think Trump has just given them another $1 trillion to immobilise, to employ more ICE people. They've been offered $20,000 as an inducement just to start as a payment, and then on top of that, they've wiped anyone who joins ICE. They've wiped their university fees. So I mean, I don't know how you try to stop ICE. It's a horrendous force, and I think they've already deported 200,000 migrants. So what is happening to the workforce in the United States? I mean, who's going to do all the dirty work, all the vegetables and picking up of that? I don't see how the economy of the US can survive all this. The other thing I think is maybe the putting a date on a rally on Labor Day to 2028 is probably too late. I mean, things are moving so fast and so in a horrific way with crushing every single resistance movement. That's a long way away. I think you have to start moving people maybe next year or the year after, or as soon as you can, because the only thing that stopped fascism developing in the United States, I remember at the beginning of the Second World War, was the mobilisation and benefits given to the mass of workers. There were massive rallies of fascists in the United States just before the World War that's supporting the Nazis. I think you've got to think about mobilising on that sort of level.
Thanks very much, comrade. It's a little bit democracy now, right here at Ecosocialism 2025. It's just Cyn who's more democratic socialist than Amy Goodman. What I wanted to ask is the role of the Latino community, both in fighting off ICE, but also in deepening the analysis of the revolutionary processes, because there is this US exceptionalism, if you like, that is also a product of the government and the US media kind of de-internationalising the US working class, but actually because the US is the home of imperialism, it's very important for the left to ingest those revolutionary lessons, and Latin America is just so close. So I'm just wondering about the role of the Latinos in the organised left, and also the role of the left in relating to the Latin American revolutions. And I also wanted a little bit of an insider summary of the debates about imperialism on the left in the US and where you think they're coming from. I mean, we also have the comrades from the ISO tendency or the Tony Cliff influence tendency here in two organisations. So we do get the sort of summary of the Russian Revolution or Nick's, version of their international solidarity. And we also get their sort of distorted, I think, position on imperialism. But I would like to hear from you. Now, the other thing I wanted to do was just, Democracy Now! Did have a report on Walmart funding the anti-Trump, hands-off Trump and No Kings rally. So I'm wondering if there's divisions within the ruling class. Obviously there are, but if you can spell them out, that'd be very interesting to weaken Trump. And also wanted a little bit more on the role of Chris Small and the Amazon battle and the housing crisis. I know I'm doing a bit of a Susan Price here. Amy Goodman right here, right now. We won't get him tomorrow. So Seattle DSA sounds like they're doing really good in the housing stuff. Thanks.
Somehow that was still under 3 minutes.
All right. So yeah, I just want to, I want to make a few comments that are sort of then lead into guest kind of questions. I mean, just one kind of observation I guess you could kind of make. I mean, I think we've been, I guess, a few things we've published on Links in the past week have been actually some of the writings of Paul LeBlanc on the recent kind of DSA convention. And I actually think some of his assessments, I think, are very interesting in a lot of ways, and actually kind of represents, you know, the potential that DSA, I think, could be a political force in its own right. I mean, at the end of the day, whatever criticisms you can make about the DSA, I mean, it is here to stay. It is very much an integral part of American kind of political life. And I think probably something that I have kind of observed, and that's actually, you know, especially in the context of a lot of the things you're kind of talking about. I mean, you know, when you look at kind of Australian politics right now, the level of political activity, I mean, we have this, you know, great conference and everything, but the level of political activity is actually still very low in a lot of ways. Like, in actual fact, really the main centre of political activity in Australia right now is very much the Palestine campaign, and there's a whole range of, you know, smaller kind of campaigns, etc. And in fact, we're also in a situation where, you know, typical kind of liberal institutions like NGOs are completely demobilised. But then in the context of, like the US, you know, just talking to a friend of mine from the US who, you know, became radicalised a number of years ago because, you know, I first got involved in Socialist Alliance, I was talking about socialist politics, and to be honest, he sort of almost had no avenue of like, okay, I'm starting to believe these ideas, how do I get involved? And now he's a member of the DSA and he's involved in like 4 to 5 different kind of working groups, etc. And I think that is quite an incredible kind of observation, the fact that there's such a high level of kind of political activity, there's such a high range of campaigns to get involved in. But I think the big kind of challenge, I guess, and this is obviously going to be the kind of challenge that is constantly kind of posed to the DSA, is I guess this kind of question of how does it get sustained as independent political mobilisation in the context of the fact that the Democrats are one of the most co-opting forces in politics. As you kind of mentioned, you know, Democrats are the graveyard of social movements. And I guess probably the last, I guess, I want to hear your comments, I guess, on that. And I guess the last kind of comment I guess want to make is, I mean, what is this kind of question of DSA elected officials? I mean, because really our idea of an elected socialist official is one that follows the program of the party that is elected on. At the end of the day, there's a lot of language used around endorsee, DSA is just an endorser. Are there any kind of DSA elected officials that you could kind of point to as actually following a kind of DS political program that's actually directed by a DSA branch? And I kind of want to hear any comments about that.
First question about what is DSA doing to attract women? I'm going to be giving it a very unsatisfactory answer. I mean, one thing I should say and that I will say is that we are working within very important movements that are diverse, that are young, that are full of women, like Palestine. Within our healthcare unions, we're fighting reform. We're trying to champion demands like Medicare for all and whatnot. But this is insufficient. I mean, these things are important to diversifying our group, to helping our group reflect the experiences and political perspectives of these movements. But I think one huge deficiency of DSA is that we actually don't discuss women's struggles, immigrant struggles, the ecology as such. And just to give you an example, I mean, at our recent convention, the convention's main themes were, I would say, internal organizational democratic reforms, which boring, but important to make our organization more democratic and political and militant. The other would be debate over 2028, both in the sense of, you know, contesting the presidential campaign, putting forth an alternative, doing congressional races, and also working towards May Day 2028. And I think the other major prong was Palestine. So there's not discussion explicitly of ecology, of women's struggles, of black struggles, immigrants and whatnot. And I think this reflects a couple things. I mean, I would say, unfortunately, like DSA and maybe the American left's political bent is a little workerist. Not even in a super strong politicized ideological sense, but just kind of like we inherited a more robust labor tradition. People write books about it, and because of the dearth of social movement organizations, especially democratic, open, class struggle-oriented ones for, women's rights or whatnot, it's not part of the discourse. That doesn't mean we should just let it stay that way. I think socialists could play a huge role in forming such organizations or reforming the ones that do exist into a more democratic class struggle orientation. But this is where the international left is much stronger. And so I think it's a huge benefit when I get to go to conferences like this, when we invite international comrades to our conferences or our events, and the first things out of their mouth are like, what happened to the debate about ecology or to women? And I think it's a huge culture shock for our own organization. So Yeah, there are important demands that we're raising, important struggles they're involved in, like Palestine, healthcare, whatnot. But I think there's a need to tackle it explicitly. So sorry if that's a little unsatisfactory, but it reflects the state of development, I think, of our organization. The second question, let's see, I think it was around, questions. I'm not sure if there were questions or comments around ICE in 2028, but I very much agree with the sentiment of needing to organize now and not just waiting and sitting on our hands until 2028. I try to, I think, acknowledge it a little bit in my opening remarks, and I think the movement is increasingly sensitive to this concern. Like, people know that we can't just wait and make plans for the year of 2028. They're trying to do some small rehearsal runs now, but a lot of the kind of like horizon that people are projecting towards is 2028. And so that's important in itself because of, the objective reality it has, especially because of the support from the UAW. But I think you're right that the left too needs to create discourse about, putting a halt to Trump's assault in 2025 and actually campaigning around the issues that we just named in that gigantic laundry list of things, which unfortunately I don't think most of those demands and issues don't have campaigns or even basic propaganda around them right now. I think this connects to some other questions about, the role of DSA and maybe like supporting the ICE struggles. I mean, it's a very like textured kind of like fabric. So some people, the struggle takes a lot of different forms in terms of anti-ICE work. There are direct street mobilizations and confrontations. There are a lot of our unionists are trying to work within their own unions to do political education with their coworkers about what's happening to immigrants right now, but also to champion demands related to like sanctuary cities, putting pressures on elected officials to declare sanctuary cities, to get officials, like for example, what's happening in Chicago right now, to get the mayor to not cooperate with the federal government. There are kind of more union or sectoral specific strategies too. So for example, education workers, especially in California, where a lot of the students are immigrants or undocumented, a lot of them have started rapid response mobilization networks, going with their students to their court hearings, advising families on how to navigate the legal system, or building huge mobilizations if ICE is trying to take people away. Sorry, I might have butchered the question. I forgot exactly what it was, but hopefully that was in the vicinity of it. Debates on imperialism. So, unfortunately, DSA, I think the level in DSA and most parts of the left is really low right now. So just to give you a sense of DSA, for the past couple of years, every 2 years we have a convention. It's been stuck in a quagmire. The debate is always inevitably just around the framework of campism as such, whether whether we have a critique of like an anti-imperialism that is about allying with governments or geopolitical powers that are opposed to the U.S. but might have contradictory internal class dynamics and whatnot. It's valuable to talk about campism as a tradition and what it refers to and how it plays out today, but I think it's very sad that it's limited to that. We don't debate the issues as such. There are a million different things that the left is forced to take positions on today, whether it be Ukraine, Palestine. There are going to be a million other things that pop up, especially in the unstable world that we live in. What is our debate of so-called strategic tariffs, the international tariff war, or what's happening in Venezuela? Usually, I think this is another symptom of the American left, that we tend to be very organizational and pragmatic minded and not always more political and philosophical. And so I won't condemn DSA for that, but it's a huge pitfall for us that I think a lot of our debates and resolutions that we consider in convention are just about, this line of this provision of this resolution, how is it going to structure this committee and this body, and what kind of meeting is it going to organize? Those details are not important, but they should flow from our broader political analysis. And I think it's a huge job of our tendencies and the people who feel this way to increasingly politicize DSA and to make it focus on big picture issues. And I'm very proud of my own tendency for trying to model a put politics first approach, but I think there's a lot of learning that we have to do ourselves, and to an extent we're kind of working against history. When we think about, someone mentioned the international socialist tradition, for example. I think, some of the leaders of their group are still around and alive, and they remain the best experts on international political economy that we could refer to. And just to give you an example of their training, they had Shachtmanite or left-wing communist political leaders come to their house every day to discuss Marx, Rosa Luxemburg with them. No such training or discussion exists today amongst the lefts, and so maybe to explain some of the depoliticization, it definitely reflects, again, the stage of development, the kind of footholds that the current left does have. But I totally agree that this is a deficiency, and we have to wage this debate. There's a question about Chris Small. So for context, he was the leader of an Amazon facility, JFK-8. That was the first one to kind of win union recognition at Amazon, and he should be absolutely applauded for that. That was a historic victory. It was like I forgot the saying, maybe shot heard around the world or something like that. And, it was a huge thing that we could bring to other Amazon workers to say, hey, did you hear about this? What do you think about it? Wouldn't it be great if we could bring a union to this facility as well? It completely changed the world's political consciousness about, exposing that Amazon is not, invincible. That being said, I think, he plays a very complicated role, I think, in his union. He's no longer, I think, a worker or on union staff. In fact, he was part of a leadership that was challenged by the workers of JFK, a kind of a reform tendency who opposed his group on grounds of corruption, on making decisions unilaterally, and kind of having a more individualistic approach to building Amazon. And I think this reflected in very individualistic ways of corruption and promoting his own personal brand, and in some other ways, less depoliticized ways too, of just trying to unilaterally decide things within a small group within the union. And so, we have a lot to thank him for, but he also is just as everyone in the labor movement has to grapple with real questions about union democracy and what our strategy is going to be to organize a behemoth like Amazon. And so, the next question about Paul LeBlanc, and sorry, this reminded me that I forgot to answer a question about the Socialism Conference, which was started by ISO. Now the mantle's taken up by Haymarket. He's a great comrade. He and the organizations that he's been a part of have held the torch up for rank and file politics, independent political action, real working class internationalism in some of the leanest years for the U.S. left. They should be commended. They're absolute heroes, and we still have a lot to learn from them and a lot to work with them on. Which is why it's a little bit sad that DSA it doesn't have any kind of boycott on socialism conference. In fact, people do go to it, but it's not as systematically and widely attended as, say, the Labor Notes Conference, DSA's own conferences, or other things. And it's a shame, too, because I think because it houses some of the more experienced comrades on the American left, it's tends to be a better, in some ways better, space for particular political articulation in terms of theory and history, but two, it reflects that generation tends to be a little divorced from, I think, organization today. So there's a need to bridge these two things. And the last thing is, are there any officials that kind of do embody our expectations for socialist electeds? I would say yes, more so on city council level. So not to self-promote, but my tendency has 3 city councilors elected in St. Petersburg, Florida, maybe one soon in Jersey City. There's one in Louisville, one who actually just got kicked out of the Democratic Party for defending teachers in Minneapolis. And, like I said before, having people who act in a more collective way, who, don't just operate as lone, wolves, who have teams that, of people that come from social movements, that come from DSA, who want to develop a collective strategy. That's a function of us raising those ideas within DSA, but that's also a function of the fact that these people have, been raised in struggles that actually clarify the meaning of terms like independent political action. It's not just a nice slogan to them. They actually understand what it looks like to work as an official in tandem with a movement to set a strategy together, to build actions, to, denounce, the class nature of society. And so I'll just put some of those names forth.
Thank you, Cyn. It was very illuminating. Alrighty. So we'll wrap that one up there. Thank you for your contributions, everybody, and thank you again, Cyn. At 4:30 p.m. there will be our closing panel. It's going to be right here in this room. So I don't know. You can stay. You can go get a snack. I don't know what's going on. Thank you very much, everybody.